Right.
Hello everyone.
You can all unmute yourselves if you want to speak. We're not that sort of webinar, promise.
You should just be able to tap the space button, those of you on a computer.
Right, I reckon we'll kick off in maybe about 5 past. Yeah?
Sounds good.
Cool.
So can everybody see my screen okay? Has everybody got the title screen?
It's hard to see everybody on my laptop. And that. Oh. I'll do a little bit of an intro before I get rolling to kick off. But welcome to the Dairy Genetics webinar. I promise that I won't be speaking for long because I am not the person that you want to hear from tonight. Promise. I just wanted to show you around Zoom a little bit more. Hopefully, a lot of you have used Zoom over the past few months because it seems to have really boomed in its use. What to let you know to start with is, sorry, I'm just admitting people from the waiting room as I'm going. We will be recording the webinar, but during the benchmarking section, I won't be publishing that, so I will cut that whole section out so you can talk freely if you want to about your farms, because I won't put that out to the public. So I'll probably cut it into little sections to use after that. If you can, everyone check that they can mute and unmute themselves. Just if you want to speak, it's easier to do that. And as Rob said, you can just, if you're on your laptop, you can just press the space bar, and it's a lot quicker to do that. So if everyone says hi, hello, is anybody out there? Hi. Yay, there we go. Hi. Welcome. So now that we know we can hear you, that's good, because now that you've spoken, we're going to get you to speak. So little did you know. No, if we call on somebody to speak, then we'll give you some preempting, so you can maybe have some time to have a think about it. But what we also will be doing during the webinar is doing some polls, which will pop up on your screen, so you don't really need to think anything about those. But we've also got a few areas where it would be really good if you could annotate. So if you are on your laptop, this will be in, if you go to the top, there's a little drop down that says annotate. So you can go to the stamp and you can choose whatever you like. So I am meant to be annotating right now. There we go. Can everyone see mine? If everyone could try and find it now and just do whatever you want to on the screen, then it might make it easier for later on in the session. But so by all means, go for it, because I am. That's what it says. Right. Is everyone finding that bit okay? Feel free to use the chat as well. We'll be using that option in the session. So we're all here as well. I think we've got a good bunch. Still probably a few we're waiting for, but we could start and I will give them, I'll admit them to the meeting room. So as long as everyone's happy, if at any point you want to ask a question, either type it in the chat and I will sort of guide Roland and Rob back to it, either at the appropriate time or at the end of the session. So we will come back to them and I will be keeping an eye on it, so don't think that we haven't seen it. And yeah, or raise your hand, or just simply unmute and shout up, because yeah, we're trying to make this as meeting friendly as possible as it would normally be. So, right, Roland, I will hand over to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Lucy, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our genetics webinar. A slightly different format to our usual meetings, but something that I think we're all getting a bit more used to. So I'm Roland, one of the vets up at the Lancashire LLM practice. And it's nice that we can have a joint meeting actually between the three branches in Whitchurch and Bakewell and up here in Lancs. So the plan for tonight is to first of all have a look at the basics of genetics and where we can get genetic information from and what it means. And then we'll have a look at an example farm and an example herd genetic report and how that farm used the herd genetic report and some other tools to put together a breeding strategy. And then I'll hand over to Rob, and Rob will take us through some of the benchmarking put together from your herd genetic reports. So if we look back at what has happened in the UK dairy herd over the past few decades, there have been some very significant changes and trends that have happened in that time, and we're all familiar with the pattern of the number of dairy farms decreasing and continuing to decrease, and with that, of course, the total number of cows have decreased significantly as well. And although the average herd size has increased slightly, that is mostly because it tends to be the smaller herds that are leaving the industry. But even with the huge reduction in dairy farms and dairy cow numbers, the UK as a whole is producing more milk. And of course, the reason for that is that cows are producing a lot more. And in fact, since 1975 until today, the average milk production per cow has increased by about 94%. Back then, we were averaging just over 4,000 litres. And in 2019, the average yield in the UK was just under 8,000 litres. And this increase in milk production has been achieved through breeding. We're breeding our replacements from our higher yielding cows. So we're making breeding decisions based on the actual levels of production that we see on farm that we call the phenotype. And the reason that this has been so effective for milk production is because the production traits are very heritable. So the variation that we see in milk production between cows is largely down to their genetics. And of course, the environment has a role to play as well, but it is mostly down to genetics. So when we breed replacements from our higher yielding cows, we very, very quickly improve the genetics for milk production on our farms. But unfortunately, this increase in milk production over the years has come with a huge negative impact on some other health traits in that same period. And the most significant and detrimental effect has been on fertility. So up until 2009, the UK average calving interval was increasing year on year, and then peaked in 2009 at about 425 days. And since then, that trend has been reversed, and we're now improving year on year. We've made a complete U-turn. So can anybody tell me why they think that trend might have changed, and why we're had such a U-turn in 2009 and we're now improving? Anybody, any ideas? Just remember to unmute if anybody wants to shout up any ideas why that trend has changed so significantly. No?
So Richard's put in the, we started measuring fertility index in the chat.
Yeah, so he's absolutely right. Fertility index became available on our bull proof so that we could select bulls based on daughter fertility. So I mean, the trend changed in 2009. So if everybody could use those annotations and put a mark on this graph, when do you think, and what year do you think fertility index became available? So somebody's saying 2009. 2006, is that 2006, 2007, another 2000, and some people are saying 2010, some people saying later on. Okay, so it was actually in 2005, May 2005, fertility index became available, and of course, we started using that as an index in 2005. Those calves won't have been born until 2006. 2 years later, they then calve in for the first time, and a year after that, when they calve for the second time, we then have a calving interval recorded for that animal. So that's why in 2009 we see that drop that has continued to today. So obviously we've made improvements in cow management as well, and heat detection and nutrition in recent years, but it looks very much like that U-turn in 2009 was because we could now select bulls based on daughter fertility. And with fertility, it's not as easy to make genetic progress as quickly by making our breeding decisions based on what happens on farm, because fertility and some of the other health traits have quite low heritabilities. So the variation that we see in the phenotype, the actual performance, is largely affected by the environment. So rather than making our breeding decisions based on what we see, we need to look specifically at the genetics. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth breeding for. They definitely are, because even if we provide the best environment that we can, if our genetics are not good, then that will always be the limiting factor. And I think this graph is a really nice example of how using genetics to select animals based on these lower heritability traits can have a huge effect on the overall performance. So in the UK, it's AHDB who work together with breed societies, milk recording companies, and various labs, and provide the genetic evaluations for a large range of both the production and health traits. And the traits included are the ones that you'll be used to seeing on a bull proof: production traits, health and welfare traits, management traits, and obviously the health or the type traits as well. And we can look at these individually, or we can use the various indexes to evaluate an animal's genetic merit across a range of traits in one go. And the standard index used in the UK for all year round calving herds is PLI, or Profitable Lifetime Index, and that PLI is expressed in pounds and is supposed to represent the additional profit that a bull is expected to return from each of his milking daughters over a lifetime, always compared to a bull with a PLI of 0. And to be honest, I have really no idea how accurate that pounds figure is, or how you could possibly try to predict that. And I think that definition quite possibly puts a lot of people off using PLI because they don't trust it as a figure. But when we think about PLI as a ranking system and an index that simply compares animals across a range of traits, then I think it becomes a lot more useful, and it was how it was intended to be used and should be used. And this chart shows the breakdown of what traits are included in PLI and their weightings within the index. So production traits account for about 34%, and then the rest are made up with health and management traits. So there's quite a lot of emphasis on fertility, longevity, other health, and efficiency. And if we use PLI as an index, then these are the traits that will help to promote. And then we also have a spring and autumn calving indexes that vary slightly from PLI, with even more emphasis on fertility, for example, or efficiency. And I think these indexes should mainly be used as an initial screen, simply to select the top bulls within a breed or the best heifers from a batch before looking at the individual traits of each animal. So there are a few ways that we can get genetic information about our animals, and the most obvious and becoming more and more widely used is the use of genomics, which is predicting an animal's genetic merit from their DNA analysis. So we take a hair or a tissue sample, and that gets sent to the lab, and various fixed points along the DNA strand are analysed, and they're called SNPs. Single nucleotide polymorphisms, and we look at around 50,000 different SNPs of DNA in an animal's genome. And these SNPs are then compared to a reference population of daughter-proven bulls. So there are almost 40,000 Holstein bulls that have daughter-proven proofs and have been genotyped, and this allows correlation between the different points of DNA and their actual performance. So using DNA analysis means that we can get this information about young animals, and we don't have to have performance data of their own or any progeny with performance figures. So for young animals, the genetic evaluation is based on their pedigree and on their genomic information. And it works. We can now look back at the bulls that had a genomic proof and now have got daughter-proven figures and see how the two sets of figures match up. And we can see that across a range of traits, production, cell count, lifespan, and fertility, that there was between 80 and 90% correlation between the two proofs for these traits. And when we look specifically at PLI, we can see that 89% of animals changed less than 100 points, and 61% changed by less than 50 points. So there were very few big disappointments. And the young sires, the young genomic sires that are now about 150 points above the proven bulls. So even if they do drop, they're very unlikely to be a big disappointment. So without genomic evaluations, then our predictions of genetic potential are based on pedigree information, which is simply an average of the sire and dam's figures. And when they're based on that parent average alone, they're only about 30% reliable. But then whenever that animal calves in and has its own production figures, that will increase, and then will increase again when their daughters enter the milking herd. So traditionally, without genomics, it took about 5 years before a bull had a crop of daughters contributing to their genetic evaluation, whereas with genomic testing, we can reach reliabilities of up to 70% right from the start, and then of course that increases more quickly whenever their daughters are milking. So genetic evaluations based on pedigree information alone, as I said, were only about 30% reliable, and therefore they're less useful when for looking at the individual animal level. But what they are useful for is looking at trends across a herd and identifying strengths and weaknesses within a herd, and then also using it to benchmark against other similar herds. And the reason they're not as useful at the individual animal level is because if we rank animals based on PLI based on their parent average figures, there's then considerable re-ranking whenever we add in a genomic test and more reliable data. So genetic information is available in the herd genetic report from AHDB, and it's available for any herd that is milk recording. And hopefully you'll have received a copy of your own herd genetic report, and if you have it to hand, you can refer to it as we talk through this example. But if you don't have it, we can certainly get access to it for you, and be very happy to sit down and talk you through it. So the first page on our herd genetic report is the herd summary, and it shows us the average figures for each age group. And the first thing I'd like you to tell me, we could do a quick, just a yes or no poll, is do you think that this herd has done any genomic testing so far? So if we could, yeah, we set up a poll, if everybody could just vote yes or no. Based on that chart, do you think this herd has done any genomic testing? So a few more people saying no. Would anybody like to sort of explain why they think yes or no? Anybody keen to give some reasons? A lot more people saying no. For anybody that said yes, why do you think has done genomic testing? What's telling you that? Well, it's the reliabilities actually. So if we look at the reliabilities for each age group, first of all, if we look at animals sort of at 18 to 24 months, these heifers, we can see that the average reliability is about 36%, so in the 30s, and that's what we would expect from animals that don't yet have production data of their own, certainly don't have any progeny production data, and those figures are just based on their pedigree. And we can see that when animals calve in and have some production data added to their evaluation, and possibly daughters in the herd as well, that increases. And it's not until we get to sort of more than 5 lactations that we're starting to get to the reliabilities that we get with a genomic test. But then if we look at the young calves, we can see that the reliability here is 63%. So that's telling me that there's been genomic information added to these calves, and not all of these calves will have been tested. There'll be some young calves that won't have, so that's why it's probably sitting at 63, but quite a few of them will have. And again, animals 12 to 18 months, there'll just be a few of these probably that were tested, so we've just increased the reliability of those figures slightly. And the next thing we want to take from this summary is just looking at the trend of PLI within the herd, and what we want to see is from our older animals, our older cows in the herd, down through into the young stock, we want to see that increasing year on year. And generally in this herd it is, but the youngest animals in the past year we've probably slipped back a bit, and there's probably a lot more that we could do to make sure that that PLI starts improving again. So the next table down in your herd genetic report is showing you how this herd is performing across a range of traits compared to other milk recording herds in the UK. And you can see down the left hand side we've got the UK percentiles, and then the yellow highlighted boxes under each trait indicate where this herd sits. So this is now just the milking herd that we're looking at, not Youngstock. So for this herd, our milking herd is in the top 5% of the UK for PLI, and the top 10% for production. And this is a very, very high yielding herd. And the reason they're doing so well on PLI is because not only are their production traits high, but also things like lifespan, cell count, and fertility that are still well within the top 25%, and they are all weighted quite heavily within PLI. But one thing that this herd does need to keep an eye on is inbreeding. It's not too bad, but we wouldn't want that inbreeding level to get any worse. So then if we compare the milking herd to the Youngstock, we can see some really big differences that are highlighting areas that we need to focus on in our breeding strategy. And this herd has clearly been pushing for milk production, but the overall PLI is not increasing at the same rate. So for milk production traits, we've actually moved up into the top 5%, but PLI has slipped back, and that is because almost all of our health traits have not been progressing at anywhere near the same rate as the rest of the UK. So already we have identified some key areas that we need to focus on in our breeding strategy. PLI will help overall, but actually we need to be putting a lot more emphasis on fertility, cell count, mastitis, and lifespan, of course, while still maintaining those production figures. And what we've been able to do for this herd is actually produce a bespoke index like PLI, but with extra emphasis on those things, and I'll show you that a little later. So this herd is going to try and breed, as we should do, try and breed most of our replacements from Heifers, because they are our highest genetic merit animals on the farm. So we'll make the quickest progress by breeding replacements from these young Heifers. So this herd actually did some genomic testing, and I'll just show you that these were the top 5 Heifers. So we tested a batch of young Heifers, and we can see our top heifer sitting. It's quite an interesting animal to look at, actually, because we've a really high PLI, 626, which is fantastic. And that is really coming from the health traits. We've got doing really well on lifespan and cell count and fertility, but with one major fault, which is milk. So this heifer actually has increased again in the August proof run. It's now increased maybe 5 or 6 PLI points, and still with that one fault, which is milk. So potentially a heifer to flush to a very a bull very high on milk production. And if we compare that then to the bottom 5 Heifers, we can see that we go from 626 PLI right down to minus 101. So a huge spread within one batch of Heifers on a farm, and this just shows you the distribution of the PLI across those Heifers. So some outliers at the top and the bottom, and then a big batch in the middle. And we can look at the same for fertility, and fertility is one of the things we really want to focus on. So as I said, we were able to produce a specific index for this farm, and we base it on PLI, but then we add in extra emphasis on some of the things that we want to breed for, and then we can rank those Heifers again based on this index, and this shows you the spread based on the traits that we want to breed for. So again, we've got one Heifer at the very, very top, and then a huge spread amongst the rest. So the next decision to be made is how selective we want to be when breeding these Heifers. And of course, the more selective that we are, the faster progress we'll make in terms of genetics. but we still want to be using enough sex semen to have enough replacements coming through. And heifer rearing is expensive. As we all know, it'll vary massively between farms, but on average it's roughly about 16% of the total costs on a dairy farm. So we want to be really efficient when it comes to breeding our replacements and making sure that we've got enough but not too much of a surplus. So this is one of the tools that we can use from Zoetis, a heifer calculator. There's probably plenty of versions out there, but it just allows us to put in some details about the herd. So herd size, the number of heifers coming through at the minute, culling and mortality rates, and then calving interval and age at first calving. And from that, we can see that this herd wants to have about 90 heifers coming through in the year, and we put on a bit of a contingency just to guarantee that we're going to get enough heifers coming through. So we want to be breeding just over 100 heifers, but based on their current breeding strategy, we're using a lot of sex semen. We're actually not using any conventional semen in this herd at the minute. Heifers, pretty much all heifers will get sex semen, bar the odd few that will get a beef straw, and then in cows it's probably about 60-40. And based on that breeding strategy, over the next year we're projected to get up on 220 heifers, 219 dairy heifers coming through. So more than double actually what we need. So what we did was just played about with the amount of sex semen that we were going to be using, just to try and get around that 100 mark, 100 heifers coming through in the year. And actually we can reduce our sex semen massively in the cows down to about 20%, and then select the top 60% of our heifers to use sex semen, and then the rest will get a beef straw. So we're going to really reduce the costs spent on sex semen. We're going to reduce our rearing costs, or rearing those surplus heifers, and then increase the sale of young beef calves as well. So this was the spread of those heifers based on the index, and this was roughly what that herd decided to do. So we're probably going to flush this top heifer, and then the top 60%, which falls somewhere in the middle, that tallest bar. Those heifers will all get sex semen, and then the rest will get a beef straw. So now that we've selected our heifers, I just want to show you a bit on bull selection and the tools that you can use on AHDB to do that. Few key things are, we want to be selecting bulls with a higher PLI than our best cow, and then selecting the fitness traits depending on what we want to breed for, making sure that the type suits our herd, and then looking at calving ease for maiden heifers. So when we're using young genomic bulls, we don't want to just pick one bull in case it does turn out to be a bit of a disappointment. And for reliabilities of around 70% mark, we probably want to be selecting 5 or 6 different bulls to use across those heifers. And we can use this bull selection tool on AHDB to filter basically from all of the available Holstein bulls. So we can change our PLI, select for high PLI, and make sure that, and high milk as well, and then make sure that our health traits that we want to focus on are always positive and the top half of the breed. And lastly, as I mentioned, inbreeding was one of the things that this herd wanted to just keep an eye on, and we can do that through AHDB herd genetic report as well. But if we kept increasing the amount of inbreeding in the herd, once we get over 6%, we start to see problems, or we could start to see problems with production. Certainly affects fertility, and we'll probably see more abortions and just general ill thrift in the herd. And it's estimated that the inbreeding depression is about 10 PLI points for every 1% that you go over 5% of inbreeding. So we can select the females that we want to breed from, and also search for our bulls on AHDB, and this will produce us a nice report just showing us which matings are safe and which matings aren't. So that's just a quick overview of how this herd used the herd genetic report, quite an interesting one. And also did some genomic testing to really focus their breeding strategy. So I'll, if anybody has any questions, shout up, and we can have a bit of a discussion at the end as well. If anybody has any comments they'd like to make about their own herd genetic report. But otherwise, I'll hand over to Rob to take us through some of the benchmarking.
Grand, yeah, cheers, Roland. That's brilliant. There has been a question. So Rich Bostock from Genus was just commenting on that the herd genetic report, sort of saying that the PLI in Youngstock seems to have plateaued. We're not getting the improvements that they maybe once were with poor frame size and frame size and maintenance sitting in the bottom 10%. So they've obviously been carried on breeding large cows by the looks of it. But we'll talk a bit more about those. We'll talk a bit more about those some of those traits in the benchmarking. So I'm going to jump straight into the benchmarking. I know it's what you guys have sort of signed up for, and it'd be good to see some of your figures up in lights. So have heifer calves are actually more likely to give more milk. They have improved fertility. There's more and more stuff coming out about that. 140 kilos extra milk per lactation is what I've got written down if a cow has a heifer calf. But yeah, we're seeing a swing back towards, or swing to sexed AI, and it's now outweighing the use of beef semen, and assuming that all the pregnancies and calves we've got on the ground at the moment are retained in the dairy herd, the net impact of inseminations is actually going to be that the UK herd starts to grow again. And that's assuming that we keep all these heifer calves, but by the start of 2022, the dairy herd would start growing. I suppose that the question then is, are we breeding too many heifers? And I would suggest possibly we are. We still import a lot of heifers into the UK, but to be now breeding using so much sexed semen use that we're going to actually grow the national herd is an interesting idea. AI trends. Roland touched on this, but basically by whether it's been a conscious decision, I'd imagine a lot of it is, but sometimes by accident, you're leafing through a catalogue. Oh, I want 20 straws of that. That looks good. Looks like a good bull. The use of young sires has massively gone up. So that's genomic sires, unproven sires, as it's dominating the market. Over 70% of all dairy AI inseminations are from unproven bulls, and it's probably going to be a trend that continues. There'll always be a place for proven sires, but in order to make the most of the difference. You know, your young sires, your genomic sires are, I think, now in excess of 200 PLI difference. So even though, yeah, we're sacrificing reliability, we're taking a bit of a punt on a young bull, even if that young bull disappoints us a bit, it's probably still better than the average proven sire on the market. And again, you know, I'd be interested in hearing what the genus team and what their views on that are, or anyone actually. It's not just these guys, you know. It's your discussion. That's what everyone's here for. So please let me know what you think.
Yeah, so Mark Smith just commented there in the chat saying that the gap is getting wider, and there is getting more distance between the proven population and the genomic population, which isn't anything we need to worry about really. There is the odd proven bull that still ranks pretty highly amongst its genomic contemporaries. But no, I think you're dead right, and it takes you back to something that Roland said earlier, and the fact that if you're using genomic sires, be prepared to use a couple extra than if you were using proven bulls, spread the genomic risk. And if you do use a bull that comes in slightly under where its genomic predictions were, it's still going to be probably better than some of the proven bulls out there on the market currently.
Yeah. I you know, genomics are allowing, you know, AI companies and bull studs to make decisions younger, aren't they? So genomics is very much the direction of travel, I think, for breeding companies, you know, Genus and all your competitors. It just allows quicker decision making, quicker sort of turnover from generation to generation, and so bulls that traditionally would have been brought up by studs, you know, run an early proof and then sit on them for a year, that isn't happening anymore. You know, the first decision isn't appearance, isn't really pedigrees. It's sort of, okay, let's do some genomic testing. A decent pedigree, they should stack up well. Let's do some genomic testing and go from there. So I think, yeah, as Mark's said, this gap's getting wider and will probably continue to do so.
I'd add as well, Rob, just people's confidence, I think, is continuing to grow. All the data shows that when we look back at how a group of genomic bulls have stacked up over time, on average, they're coming out very, very close to what their genomic index was. So, yeah, as long as you don't just pick one bull, you know, a few people have said it, use a group of sires, actually we can be really confident that we're going to get that genetic gain that the genomic sires are predicting.
I think Roland showed a really good slide. I think you might have just missed, Mark, that was I think it suggested 11% of only 11% is probably the way to say it. So nearly 90% of bulls didn't drop by, you know, I think 11% dropped by over 100 PLI, but you know, 90% didn't drop by very much, and 70% didn't drop even by 50. So yeah, there's good reason to have confidence in it. And this is sort of this next two slides just show the impact that genomics has had on the rate of genetic gain. This is a slide from the USA, and we see back in the 2005-2009, so the pre-genomics, we were seeing this red line as the rate of genetic improvement. When bull studs adopted sire, you know, genomics for sire selection, we saw an uplift in the rate of gain. And then when female genomics on top of that started to come into play, and so there started to be some early adoption of genomics on the female selection side, we saw an even bigger uplift in the rate of gain. And this is another slide that shows a very similar thing. This was based on the genetic merit of bulls in bull studs. Again, this just shows what a difference genomics are now making to the rate of genetic gain. They're a really useful tool, both on the sire selection side and the female selection side more recently, and that's why we're getting this increased rate of improvement. I'm sorry, I can't seem to get the chat up on my screen properly, so I'm sort of going blind, and hopefully someone's going to, Lucy or Roland might shout up and read out some of the questions.
So Rob, there is just one good comment from Richard there, who's saying that proven bulls are always going to be important as a reference population, because without that we don't have anything to compare the genomic bulls to, and as that reference population grows and grows, obviously then our genomic bulls and our genomic figures are going to become more and more reliable. So it is a very important thing to have those as a reference population.
So finally, just wanting to talk about breeding plans, and I think the value that can be gained from having a review, regular reviews of your breeding plan. And rather than this being the sort of breeding objectives, I sort of split them out slightly. Breeding objectives are, what do you want your ideal cow or heifer to look like, or perform like, or what do you want it to look like on paper, versus how are you getting calves on the ground, I suppose, is the breeding plan side of things. And I think there's a clear consumer demand or desire to reduce the amount of dairy bull calves that are being born and subsequently being shot, or even going for dog meat, or quite what's happening with them. Export again is a contentious, export of bull calves is a really contentious issue, which consumers and milk contracts and Red Tractor all want to work to reduce, and balancing, increasing your sac semen use and subsequently increasing your beef AI use is the way to do it. Beef calves provide a valuable cash flow. I know potentially TB restrictions and bits and pieces like that may not always mean that you've got a ready cash flow from those beef calves, but they are a much more valuable product than a dairy beef calf, dairy bull calf. Reduced rearing cost is something that's often overlooked. By only keeping the number of heifers you actually need, plus a little contingency to make sure you've got some spares, some selection, you basically have fewer mouths to feed, and unless you're extremely efficient in your heifer rearing, you're probably not going to be making money off it. And by reducing overstocking, potential overstocking, if you're not cramming those sheds full, not quite as full, you're going to reduce your disease rates, disease burdens. And we're going to have a quick look at the final bit of benchmarking, which I've got two sort of quick questions. So something I forgot to say is that from due to this industry demand to reduce dairy bull calves, there's going to be a new requirement, I think, from October this year, that all dairy herds will have to have a written breeding plan in place to reduce the birth of dairy bull calves. That's going to be a Red Tractor farm assurance requirement. So all dairy herds in the UK will be required to do that. And I think it's sensible to start thinking about that now. And the sooner you do it, the sooner you can start putting it into place. The paper itself isn't worth much, but the act of planning your replacements really is. So this is, I'm hoping I can start annotating, and I'd like you, if you don't mind, just to put a cross or a tick or a mark or something on here as to how much how much it costs you, or you think it costs you, to rear a heifer on average through to first calving. So we've got somewhere between 2,000 and £0, And if you haven't been in the benchmarking, there's a couple of, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 extra blocks where you can put in a mark. I was hoping for a few more. Someone have a guess at how much they think it costs. Yeah, it costs them to put a heifer through to calving. We've got a few coming in. It's a really interesting figure, this, because I think it's underestimated, and that's why I've put it up. So AHDB regularly do a bit of a review on this, and they like to try and sort of keep track of it. It hasn't come down very much over the past sort of 5 to 10 years. It was traditionally, we said £1,800 all in. You know, there's a lot of costs in that, direct, indirect costs, but it's probably only come down 50 to 100 quid. And you know, there's a pretty buoyant fresh calved heifer price at the moment as well. So it's, I personally think that there's not a large proportion, or certainly not a majority of farms who can rear heifers for much under market price. Now there's obviously a value to rearing your own rather than buying in. You know, being a closed herd is massively valuable for a lot of reasons, but the average cost that AHDB puts this is still 1,750. So it's good to see that everyone's sort of putting a mark nice and low, and I hope that is, you know, there or thereabouts how you're doing it. But I do caution people to against rearing too many heifers. Right, next slide, hopefully. So I've got another question. I'm looking for some answers. Just let me clear the marks off them. So, there we go. So if we could annotate this one, how many Youngstock do you think you rear for every milking cow? So this is, you know, if you've got 200 cows in milk, with include dries if you want, so 200 adult cows. If you had 200 heifers, you'd be rearing 1 to 1. If you had 100 heifers, you'd be at 0.5. So it's basically for every adult cow, how many heifers do you think you have? And once we've got a few more of these scribbled on, I'll show you. I'll show you how many heifers. Some of the figures might be wrong, but I'll show you how many heifers a lot of this group of the 10 of you actually have for every milking cow. And some of the, I'm not vouching for the reliability of them, but it's something that needs reviewing. I mean, I know some of you that have a lot of heifers will see selling heifers as an income source. For a lot of farms it is. But for some farms, they might start to think, how can I cut my labour cost? Would I be better rearing fewer, just rearing what I need? Especially if we're looking at a stale market for fresh cows. Now, at the moment, market's pretty good. Right, I should clear them. So I have saved them, so I will send you a bit of a comparison of where you think you are versus where we really are. Joins. So this is the spread So there was no one quite up at 1.5, which I think was where our highest estimate was. But there's certainly a lot of people with at least as many followers as they do milking cows. I suppose the way I like to think of it is, let's say your average, and on average the culling rate, replacement rate is about 30%. So an average age of first calving is somewhere towards 2 years. So basically we need 2 years worth of culls, 2 years worth of replacements. So that probably puts it somewhere around 0.5 if you're very efficient, I suppose, at converting calves into adult cows. If you can get them calved in quick, get them calved in young, and don't lose very many. If you're the perfect calf rearer, you can run on really tight margin for error, and it looks like that's what Newcastle's doing. They're looking to buy in some Youngstock. I wouldn't kind of guess, but that's close to the wind at a low culling rate. The guys of you who are up above 1, it basically means you have enough heifers to cut out 50% of your herd every year, which I guess you're not doing. So it leaves you with a big surplus to think about doing something with. But yeah, I put that up there because I think that's a really interesting discussion point, that if you take nothing else away, just think about going and reviewing what you're doing in terms of Youngstock. Roland sort of covered this, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but we as LM vets and plenty of other people will have herd inventory calculators available, so that you can basically plug in some herd parameters, culling rate, age of first calving, calving interval, things like that basically estimate how often you have a calving, how often you need a replacement to come into the herd, estimate how many replacements you need, and then you plug in your current breeding strategy and it will tell you how many you've got. An even more useful exercise can be to sit through your diary or your farm software and work out each month, how many heifers am I due, how many beef calves am I due, how many dairy bull calves am I due, because I dare say it might open your eyes, and especially if you start planning for these dairy bull calves and saying, oh God, I'm due 15 bull calves next month, or something like that. It can be a really useful exercise to go through and do. Yeah, and by projecting what we've currently got, it'll tell us our surplus. Now this farm, we've only got a narrow surplus. They were looking to expand, I think, at the time, and so we didn't have a massive surplus. But even with not a massive surplus, they were using a lot of conventional semen. So just by looking at the previous sort of breeding plan, using a lot of conventional semen, by shifting away from that conventional. So this is the future breeding plan we plugged in and put together, by using more sexed across the heifers and cows, and therefore no conventional and more beef. We were able to look at what the positives were, what the negatives were. So with this model, you're suddenly going to start using more sex semen, but you're going to be saving on conventional, and you're going to be getting fewer male bull calves. That wasn't a massive income stream for this farm, so they weren't going to lose out too much, as they were going to gain massively on selling beef calves, and potentially selling some dairy female calves as bulling heifers. That was their plan. And we can plug in costs and we can do all sorts of stuff, but I think this is basically going to be the requirement that Red Tractor are looking for, that you actually do sit down with your advisor or your vet or someone and plan your replacements. And that's all I've got.
There's some comments there about contract rearing heifers, so helping to sort of highlight how much it costs to rear them, and then that the facilities on farm sort of can be used, and the team concentrate on the milk and herd, as opposed to rearing heifers.
Yeah, Mark's put in a good sort of soundbite. That heifer rearing is the second largest variable cost after feed. Anything you can do to just trim the edges of that is useful. So yeah, the addiction to keeping cows is definitely real. We you know, these I'll go back here. These benchmarking figures certainly aren't the worst I've seen. You know, I have seen herds up at 1.5 heifers, and when we discussed it, the fellow just said, "Oh well, I'll just increase my culling rate." Well, if you don't need to cull, don't do it just because you feel like you've got too many heifers. Certainly isn't the way to do it. But yeah, contract rearing heifers does focus the mind. If you're getting a bill for every heifer that you send to your rearer, suddenly you rethink things. Yeah, but I think Roland might have read that one out. But the beauty of sending your heifers away leaves it's not quite going the route of being a flying herd. You still have the benefit of rearing your own stock. You're responsible for the disease and the genetics, but you focus on what pays the bills. You know, you focus on your milkers and your fresh cows. So I would, yeah, we welcome any more questions if anyone's we welcome any more questions if you guys have them about anything we've talked about tonight, the benchmarking or Roland stuff. Everyone can get hold of their herd genetic report. I encourage you to do it. We as vets are happy to sit down and go through them. And yeah, that's sort of where we are. Genomic testing, there's plenty of people offering that now, and we are included in that bag. We do offer genomic testing. It's not a sales pitch. I'm not going to go into that. It's available. It's horses for courses. Different genomic tests offer different things, and different services and packages around them. But yeah, I encourage you all to get at the very least, get hold of your herd genetic reports, talk to your vet, have a rethink of your breeding plan potentially. And thank you all for joining. Going to leave things hanging for a minute or two, but you're all welcome to drift away, I think, at this point. And yeah, thank you very much. I'm
sure if you've got any questions, Rob and Roland won't mind. I'll send round some emails or something, and if you want to get in touch, and but by all means, feel free to get in contact with us. You know the numbers and the emails. Any questions to go?
There might be a few that's fallen asleep. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'm going to wrap up then. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. I'll send around your email addresses as long as you guys don't mind.
Yeah. Kicked him out. I thought that went all right. Well.
Yeah, that was good.
Shy using the mic, most of them, but
difficult to get conversation.
Yeah, but it has come flying in on the chat. I just struggled to see the chat while I was doing a presentation.
No, this is it. So the ideal would be to have two screens and to do it, so you've got it all like this. But thing is, sometimes it's really hard to interrupt. Like when you guys are in full flow, you see a question come in, you don't want to interrupt until you find like a natural pause, do you? But
it would. I don't know what I was clicking. I couldn't get the chat back up for my drop down, and then I'd click something and it'd just appear again, and I'd be like, "Oh right, there's 5 questions coming." Or
there wasn't much delay, if I'm honest, for any of them.
No, but it's good. You got all sorts of people talking. You've got the Genus lot involved, Phil Hallhead contributing plenty.
Yeah.
A couple of the farmers, Mark Robinson, Dave Shardlow, VC.
Who's Richard Bostock?
Pardon? Richard Bostock works for Genus. Yeah, he's like our area rep, but he does a lot. He's very active in the like pedigree show cow scene as well. Does a lot of cow photography and stuff.
He's down around Europe, is he?
Yeah, he's quite a nice guy actually. Really quite a good lad. And yeah, not like obstructive. He gets involved and he's not not obstructive. Yeah. So Mark Robinson messaged me privately at one point, just saying we're Leicester and actively trying to reduce stature but maintain strength and width.